Brand new House Speaker Mike Johnson is already calling out his own axis of evil. In a new interview with Sean Hannity, the congressman from Louisiana eagerly prescribed Russia, China, and Iran to be the greatest adversaries of the United States.
By the leaders of Iran, that they themselves may get involved in a conflict. If that happens, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I would say all bets are off in the Middle East. We could have a full-out war in the Middle East, Israel at the center of it, and at that point, if Israel's existence is put in jeopardy, I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I've known for almost 30 years, I don't think there's anything he won't do to preserve and protect his country from people that have committed their lives to destroy it.
He has to do that, and around here people throw around the phrase existential threat. They have an existential threat every day. I mean, their neighbors want to eliminate them and wipe them off the map. So Prime Minister Netanyahu is resolved. I've spent time with him personally. I know him as well. I think he's a strong leader at this important time, and I think he's going to do what is necessary. And America will back him up. I mean, they tell us when we're in Israel, and you've been there, and they say the reason that we are able to sustain ourselves and survive is because everyone knows that our big ally is America. We know that Iran is directly tied to all this. These are Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies of Iran, and they're tied in now with Russia and China. I mean, it is a new axis of evil. That's how we see it, and so it has to be addressed accordingly.
If Israel, with all the funding of terror and all these terror organizations, are they within their right to fight back and go directly at Iran?
Of course. That was the first, as you noted, the first act of my speakership is that we passed that resolution to articulate that and make it very clear where we stand. The House is back in business, and we're going to stand with Israel.
Johnson is facing his first big test of the speakership as he looks ahead at a looming government shutdown deadline. Government funding is set to run out on November 17th, making the next 3 weeks critical in figuring out what to do about this ongoing obstacle Congress is facing.
Meanwhile, Johnson's new role is sparking outcry among critics due to his conservative views. President of the Human Rights Campaign, Kelly Robinson, spoke out about Johnson's election to the speakership, writing on X, "Mike Johnson is someone who doesn't hesitate to scream his hatred for the LGBTQ+ community from the rooftops while introducing legislation that seeks to erase us from society and history. Everyone who voted for him will have a stain on their record." Here's what Johnson had to say to Fox News host Sean Hannity on his view on gay rights, referencing some of the Obergefell Supreme Court opinion.
I am a rule of law guy. I made a career defending the rule of law. I respect the rule of law. When the Supreme Court issued the Obergefell opinion, that became the law of the land, okay? I respect the rule of law, but I also genuinely love all people, regardless of their lifestyle choices. This is not about the people themselves. I am a Bible-believing Christian. Someone asked me today in the media, they said, it's curious, people are curious, what does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun? I said, well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. That's what I believe.
So I think the question then becomes, is this your view in your personal life that, you live your life with the interpretation of the Bible, that it is wrong for a man to lay with another man or what have you? And does that translate to your career legislatively? Do you also want to make laws banning people from getting married? It sounds like that might be the case for Mike Johnson. We're going to have to wait and see. Comparing, you say tomato, I say tomato, Obergefell. This is a case that the Supreme Court, or Obergefell, this is a case the Supreme Court has asked, we'd like to hear it again. We'd like to overturn this precedent. Even Clarence Thomas, someone who's in an interracial marriage himself, has called for a lot of these former cases protecting freedoms for people to marry different people socially, that they want to hear cases again and potentially overturn them. We know the court's very different today, but to have someone as Speaker of the House, highest position of power in Congress, also sharing views that maybe we need to overturn some precedents is something that I think scares a lot of members of the LGBTQ+ community.
I don't think that's what he was saying at all. When he references the rule of law, I think what he's referring to there is that his personal position is that he opposes gay marriage, but that he respects the Supreme Court's opinion, and therefore he's not going to try to challenge that in any way legislatively. Whether a conservative legal group decides to bring a challenge to the Supreme Court to look at Obergefell again, that would be up to them, but it wouldn't be under the purview of Johnson as being Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be relieved to hear that. I wouldn't think he would receive unanimous support if he was taking those kinds of extreme positions, right? We had Hakeem Jeffries say that there's some bipartisan, agreement there that Mike Johnson isn't the worst pick. It seems that they like him more than they would have liked a Jim Jordan in the position. And the way he speaks, he sounds like a leader. I think best case scenario, we just have someone in that position so that we can fund the government again. Now, his support for Israel, saying that he would support Israel striking back directly at Iran, that could spark a World War III. That's concerning. That's deeply concerning, especially when we think about what's happened in the past when they've tried to have these stopgap bills. They've gone back and rebudgeted former funds that are allocated to the Pentagon. We had the recent Pentagon appropriations bill become a huge contentious point around funding for Ukraine. It seems that a lot of Republicans serving in the House feel differently about Israel, but I can definitely see a world where there's more funding given to Israel. And we only have 9 members of Congress that voted against that resolution that he referenced, vowing their support to Israel. So that's 97.9% of representatives in the House. And yet we have only 41% of people in the United States that even support the United States giving weapons to Israel. So I think that's an issue that he's going to have to grapple with. I think that could hurt him for re-election in his district, but now he's become a household name, and it seems that he's following the administration, and I think that's really concerning for a lot of Americans.
Yeah, I immediately had an issue, particularly with his comments about Ukraine and how he wants to send more funding to Ukraine, because previously when his name was in contention for speaker, he actually expressed skepticism about increased Ukraine funding and suggested that he wants better accounting of that money. And then once he got into the speaker position, all of a sudden he's calling for more. And I think one of the first challenges of his speakership is, will he move to try to separate out aid to Israel and Ukraine? Because President Biden has called for those aid packages to be bundled together because he wants people to feel obligated to support one or the other because of the inclusion of the other. And so Mike Johnson should separate these out. He should have Congress people have to go on the record whether they support funding for Israel, and separately whether they support increased funding for Ukraine. Because to your point, there are a lot of Republicans who would support increased funding to Israel, but not Ukraine. And so piecing those together into a bundled package puts people in a difficult position of feeling obligated to vote for a bundled package, whereas they might not support one or the other if they were separated out. So Mike Johnson should absolutely make sure that these packages are voted on separately, aid to Ukraine and aid to Israel. But based on his comments there to Sean Hannity, it doesn't seem like he's interested in doing that. And that seems like a reversal on his previous position, and one of the reasons why people supported him going into the speakership. He's also one of the first socially conservative speakers from the Republican side in decades, which is a big deal for social conservatives and for the more right-wing part of the Republican caucus. And so they were very excited about his speakership. Then they saw some videos on Twitter where he was talking about white privilege, and that raised some red flags for conservatives as well. So we'll have to see if he actually ends up walking the walk based on what people believed his positions to be prior to getting voted in.
Yeah, an absolute mixed bag, that Mike Johnson. His position on abortion has gotten him some attention as well, supporting a national ban, which is something a lot of Americans have had to grapple with since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I think a lot of Americans are on the side of freedom of choice, but believe in some sort of a threshold, a certain amount of weeks before, there's no longer abortion available. A lot of folks are against the late-term abortions, and I think Mike Johnson is going to have to grapple with his position and maybe come to a compromise, because it sounds like a lot of the House Republicans want to bring a bill of that nature to the floor. Lindsey Graham has spoken about it, reversing his earlier position, saying that we're pushing this issue back to the states. So that's another thing people are thinking about around Mike Johnson's election to the speakership here. And I think you're right to point out that the Freedom Caucus, Matt Gaetz specifically, was talking about piecemealing how they vote on budgets, how they vote on whether or not to fund Ukraine versus Israel, rather than lumping all of their votes into one bill where they agree on a new budget or adjusting where funding is allocated for these stopgap bills. I really think members of Congress need to own their votes on each individual issue. I think that's a really important thing for transparency in our democracy. I think a lot of members of Congress get away with far too much by voting on these packages in a lump sum. And I would hate for us to be in a world where Mike Johnson comes up with some lame excuse, which is, it would just take too long if we were to do that. And we really need to fund the government right now so it doesn't shut down. And then we have this whole thing again where Matt Gaetz might introduce another motion to oust the speaker. And I hope he would do so. I hope he would hold them accountable for that.
I think he absolutely would. I think he would be more than willing to do that if Mike Johnson ends up not living up to his promises. And Mike Johnson is going to have a difficult balancing act because he not only has the support of the Freedom Caucus, which he has been an ally to for, I think, the entirety of his time in Congress, but he's almost certainly had to make some concessions to the moderate wing of the Republican Party as well. And we'll see how that affects his ability to go through this process while only having a slim majority, as well as knowing that probably most of what they pass is not going to get through the Senate or signed by President Joe Biden. We're going to take a break and be back with more Rising after this.